Hey, Trailblazers and Tarmac Tacklers, welcome back to the Maximum Mileage Running Podcast. It is now 2025. I am your host, Nick Hancock, USCA and UK Athletics running coach and author of two books, the Ultimate Cookbooks for Runners, available on Amazon. And I am here with
Matt Scarsbrook, and I'm a runner.
I wish you'd stop doing that.
Okay, I'm a runner with a little bit of background in soft tissue therapy and a complete nerd when it comes to pain and injury and recovery and stuff.
And just a nerd in general.
And just a nerd in general.
Particularly on running stuff as well. And you are more than just a, well, you are, yes, you are a runner, but you are also one of my coaching clients. And we are getting you prepped up for the Centurion 50 Slam this year, which is all four of the Centurion 50 races. So
yeah, and in fact, I've just enjoyed a Christmas, as have several other of your athletes, if the WhatsApp group is anything to go by, enjoying your miracle intervals, which when I first saw it, I did wonder if it was, to do with the miracle of Christmas, but no, it was to do with the miracle of I survived. They were awful.
Yeah. No, not everybody's had them. I mean, most people are having them at some point, but they are a very good session to increase leg turnover, and yeah, get the heart rate
Get
up.
the lungs burning.
Yes,
It's
yes,
interesting that
indeed.
not everyone's having them, actually, because that leads quite nicely into what I wanted to ask you about today.
Yes. No, of course,
Which
there are some people
have we got anything important we need to talk about before we waffle?
um just yeah, how was your Christmas?
It was all right, actually. It was nice and relatively relaxed, which actually meant, from a training perspective, it wasn't too difficult to fit in my training sessions, which was quite nice.
Yeah.
Front loading Christmas Eve with both a strength set and an interval set was a little bit harsh, but at least it gave me Christmas Day off. And yeah, because it was relatively chilled, obviously seeing family, but also quite a bit of time at home, it meant fitting in sessions didn't feel like a stress, which it absolutely can do when you're kind of bouncing around seeing family and thinking, oh crap, I've got 2 hours I've got to get in today somehow. And
Yeah.
so, no, from
And,
that
and,
perspective,
and
it's really nice.
yeah, and that's why I say to everybody I coach that, and anybody listening, things like Christmas and going on holiday and stuff like that, it is important to take that downtime and spend the time with family and stuff. And, don't worry too much about training. If you miss something, don't worry about it. It's okay. Like, missing a couple of runs because you want to spend some time with your family, is absolutely fine. Like, and holidays as well. Holidays are supposed to be holidays, and I don't like it when people get stressed about, oh, I don't know if I can run. I'll have to find a hill or this, that, or the other. I don't know the routes. I'm like, just it's okay. Just don't run for the week, or just go on a treadmill in the gym at the hotel or whatever. And I pretty much did that because I was away. We went to me and my wife, Alison, we met in Dubai 15 years ago, and so we stopped off in Dubai for a few days and met up some old friends. I was reminded why I don't live there anymore, if I'm totally honest. So kind of nice to see it again, but I definitely won't be rushing to. And then we went to the Maldives, very island. It was very hot. It was good for heat training, that's for sure. But it took me a good 6 days to get anywhere near enough to do a miracle intervals session, which I did the 30-second hard 15 off one, and
Yeah.
it was pretty grim on sand in the heat.
Yeah. I mean, the heat's bad enough doing it on sand as well. I mean, part of it sounds like a humble brag, but doing it on sand must be pretty tough.
Yeah, the good thing, I mean, I didn't do it on like the really soft sandy beaches, just the kind of the inside loop of the island was,
Yeah.
it was sand, but it was very, very hard packed. It was actually a bit of a joy to run on, if I'm honest, but it just made the miracle intervals a little extra
Yeah.
harder.
I know. I know.
But yeah, we had a nice time, and I just didn't stress about training, and probably come back a little fatter than most people, but I know, with the all-inclusive buffets and stuff. But yeah, we had a nice time, and but yeah, ready to rock and roll for 2025 now.
Yeah, well, then, of course, the snow and ice has arrived, which has thrown a slightly different spanner in the works when it comes to
Yeah.
training. We were just talking off air beforehand. Wednesdays is my intervals day, and I have an intervals set that I'm supposed to fit in this morning, and it's trying to find an area that I can run on that's not covered in ice. So it's nice to
Yeah.
hear that, not that I won't run this morning, but that small changes to the plan are okay.
Indeed, we have to be adaptive, and that's why I don't offer plans. I only offer a coaching service. There's no you can't go on like the maximum mileage website and download a plan. I just don't do them because they sometimes need to change. It's funny. I was talking to somebody yesterday actually who uses that runner app,
Oh
and
yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah, and yeah, it's supposed to adapt for people, but it just doesn't. Just doesn't.
Well, there we go.
Yeah.
Well, so I alluded to it earlier, but this is kind of what I wanted to pick your brains on this morning. So this is
Mm.
kind of a set of questions really. It's a topic that I've wanted to pick your brains on for a little while, which is all right. So you don't do plans. Obviously, most runners who are either coached currently or who are running currently with a an event in mind will have been on Google, will have seen what a plan looks like. There's plenty of them, standard plans out there that kind of make a lot of assumptions about who you are and what you're trying to achieve. But what I'm curious to know is from a coaching perspective, I like running the longer distances. I've never particularly aimed for the shorter, faster distances. I don't particularly consider myself a very fast runner. And frankly, I prefer the eating on the run that an ultra provides. But I am curious about, how people train for those shorter, faster distances and what their training plans might look like compared to, say, mine. And I'm going to fall into using the word training plan. I know it's not a
Mhm.
plan as such; it's my coaching, but I'm gonna fall into using that word. So, what I wanted to kind of get an idea really of, because I'm nosy and I'm curious, is if we were to compare different race distances like a 5K, 10K, and I appreciate even from a specificity perspective, even those are quite different. But let's talk about the shorter distances, 5K, 10K, and then we look at the longer distances, say marathon up to sort of ultra. And I'm going to pitch a 50 miler as just a middle of the road ultra there, because obviously these things can go on for days. You know, what I'd like to kind of get through today and get a bit of a better understanding is what does an average week look like for those different athletes? How do you as a coach bring the specificity in for those different distances? And when I'm out there doing my interval session and thinking, I'm running 50 miles here, I'm certainly not going to be running them at my 5K pace. Why am I doing my 5K pace as intervals? Yeah, how does that all fit in? So if we sort of start with what does an average week look like, and maybe there isn't such thing as an average week. I mean,
Mhm.
you're going to tell me, but what does an average week look like for shorter distances versus say longer distances in terms of, number of miles run maybe, or number of strength sessions maybe? Is strength even important for shorter distances over longer distances or vice versa? Like, talk to me.
Talk to you. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to try and do that without eating this brownie that is sat next to me on my desk. It's actually a Protein Works brownie, so it's a very high protein brownie, but it's really tasty. Um, if anybody wants discount with Protein Works, yeah, I'm just going to
I was
plug
going to say that
my
was a nice segue.
plug my discount code, which is Nick Run. So if you go on the Protein Works website and just put Nick Run, Nick Run, um, as a discount code, and you'll get discount on it. They are really good, and it's kind of part of. It's actually a segue from me talking about me getting a little bit fat over Christmas. I'm really trying to keep my protein up and trim this belly off because a 2:35 marathon is not gonna happen with this thing around my gut. So yeah, okay. So I will always start off by saying it is all very individual to the athlete and their goal. And yes, there are definitely going to be themes that are going to be very, very different for something like a 5K versus a backyard ultra. I think we sort of came up with the idea of this, or you came up with the idea of this chat a few weeks back because the parkrun world record had been destroyed.
Yeah,
13:44 by that young lad in Ireland, wasn't it?
it was.
Um,
Yep.
and I think in the same week, the backyard ultra world record went as
Yeah,
well.
well, our British lady, and it shames me to say her name's gone completely out of my head, but yeah, she smashed
Yeah.
it. Well, she smashed her own record, in fact.
Hmm.
She'd set up the previous British and world record and then smashed it again not that many months later. So yeah, and it was like these records are falling,
Yeah.
and it's yeah, it just sparked my interest in how are these two individuals and the rest of us making sure they're getting that specificity to allow them to do this?
Mm.
What does it look like? What do their weeks look like?
Yeah. So yeah, and specificity is a really key word there, and I talk about it all the time. Like there is, and specificity will particularly come into play in the latter part of someone's plan.
Okay.
Um, my personal coaching philosophy has always been get fast, get strong, run long. But that would also apply to, running short as well. And it would apply even more to running short. The strength training would definitely be different. So let's talk about the strength training for a
Mhm.
start. Um, I mean, okay, in terms of like the actual structure of someone's week, I always come back to that point of, you the athlete, what have you got available to in terms of time, and how do we then maximize that time that you have to get the best bang for your buck? Because, I could say to you, the most ideal way to train um, for any distance really is usually 6 days a week. I
Mhm.
would say even with an elite, excuse me, elite level athlete, I would always give a day off. A day off is key, and that doesn't mean sitting on the sofa doing nothing. It might be an easy spin on a bike, or we just do a bit of core work that day, or something. It's just a very kind of light day. But if you haven't got 6 days a week to train, which quite frankly, a lot of people I coach don't have 6 days a week to train. I think, are pretty much one of them. We've all got busy lives
Yeah.
and things happening and stuff. So and James Scott, who
Hmm.
um, I coached for a long time. He's still very much part of the maximum mileage group. But he only ever had 3 days a week to train, and in those 3 days a week, we got him down to a 3:08 marathon, um, multiple 100 milers, 50 milers. Even did the Kennet and Avon Canal race, which was 145 miles.
Yeah, I
Um,
remember watching him, tracking him through that.
yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah. And we did all that on 3 days a week. So it is all about maximizing the time no matter what your goal is. Um, because you could say to somebody 6 days a week is ideal, but if they haven't got 6 days a week to train, then trying to fit 6 days a week of training in and around life, I always talk about that kind of that stress element that we've all got stress, kids, jobs, all that kind of stuff. And training is also a stress. It's a stress that we need to be able to adapt and get better and overcome and stuff. But too much of all of that stress together just invariably ends up leading to, burnout or hate running now, or I hate my wife or hate my kids or whatever it might be. And we don't want you to hate anything. Um, Injury, burnout, or, illness, that all of that sort of stuff, very much comes into play. You might be having to sacrifice sleep to get up, at 4 in the morning to start running before the day happens, whatever it is. So always think about what time do you have available, and then somebody like me then takes that time available, and we get the best bang for buck. When it comes to then the specificity of those events, so something I'm certainly not a 5K coach. So if anybody listening is looking to have coaching for a 5K, I am not your guy. However, if I was to think about coaching somebody for a 5K, I would every runner would have plenty of easy work. We need that easy work to um, set the groundwork and build that aerobic side of
Okay.
things. But something like a 5K, we would definitely be focusing on more speed work. harder intervals more often. Things like 200-meter reps, 400-meter reps would definitely be playing a key factor. On a flat terrain, ideally a running track is going to be a real key thing. Um, and then as you kind of get closer to race day, you then start thinking about increasing the length of the intervals and running at race pace.
Why, out of interest, why are 400-meter intervals? You sort of you seemed like you emphasized 400-meter intervals there. What is it about 400 meters that makes it sort of a key interval distance for you? Is
Because
it the
you
amount of
tend,
average amount of time? Is it
yeah,
the
because
kind of the
you
aerobic or anaerobic?
yeah, because you're talking about wanting to run as fast as you possibly can, whilst getting a stimulus that gets your heart rate up enough, um,
Okay,
but not but not running so hard for so long. Because running that hard, you start getting into the realms of 800, meters, a mile, that kind of thing. You can't do as many reps.
right. Okay,
You
okay,
then need the recovery in between those reps to be able to run hard again. And you're talking about the length of the recoveries in between those reps is a little bit longer as well. I tend to work on a 1-to-1 ratio, and that's actually where the evidence would lean, even 1-to-2 ratio. So 400 meters hard. Let's say that took you 90 seconds, for example. You would then double the amount of you would then add a 90 to 3 minutes, 90 seconds to 3 minutes of recovery to be able to go again. And that sounds like a lot,
yeah, it does. But I'm aware
but
that it takes a certain amount of time to get glycogen and oxygen back into the muscles to allow
exactly,
you to make the most of the rep.
exactly. And that's the point, is that we need, it's like powerlifting.
Yeah.
I've seen memes of like powerlifters. They do their five really hard, powerful reps, and then they take a nap for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
it's
the way
it's
I
that
like to do my strength training, I've got to admit.
yeah, and it's that premise. We are looking to go hard. We a lot of 5K running is about the neuromuscular um, biomechanical side of things. You need that form to be good, to be strong, to be able to run hard. It's a lot of effort condensed into a shorter space of time.
Okay. So how does that look then if we jump to an extreme then and we kind of go, well, I hate to say marathon being the extreme because of course I find the marathon is so variable. You've got someone like yourself trying to do a 2:35, and then you've got someone like me who'd be quite happy with anything around 4 hours. There's obviously quite a difference there in terms of intensity of running, I suppose. And so the marathon I find quite a tricky one to ask, how does that vary compared to something like a 5K? Because I imagine someone like yourself, are you doing interval sessions closer to that really high intensity 400 meters type set, or are you doing something like 3 to 5 minute type intervals?
Yeah. So um, there are still definitely opportunities to do things like 400 reps, harder reps, getting that speed up, and actually a big kind of part of the way I do marathon training. And this is the other thing that you sort of need to think about as well, is actually the length of training for something like a 5K.
Right.
You could get a lot of bang for buck within an 8-week period.
Oh, I see. Sorry. Run up to the event, for example,
Yeah,
training. Oh,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
with you. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Whereas with something like a marathon, ultra marathon, it's a longer time to train is going to benefit you. So what I tend to do in those kind of the first 4 week of and a lot of my athletes who experience this now, this is why the miracle intervals have been popping into people's plans, and various other interval sessions that I give people, really hard, short hills, that kind of stuff, progression runs, that kind of thing, but shorter period at a higher intensity. At this stage of the game, is to set that base level pace, get as fast as you possibly can before you start going into the longer intervals because that is definitely going to need to happen. So what will happen as we start to get towards towards the last 8 weeks of training is that marathon pace intervals start coming into people's plans. So a quite sort of classic structure of a week would be Tuesday or Turd Tuesdays, as Chris Chaplin, who I coach, calls them. um, uh, so on a Tuesday, for example, you might start finding that you'll have marathon pace intervals, let's say 3 by 2 miles.
Mhm.
That's kind of a classic one that I'll give with half a mile recovery period in between each one. Um, but then your long runs will start morphing into something like kind of the early stages of a plan. Your long runs are anything sort of 10 to 15 miles, but it's all easy, nice and chilled. We're building that base. We're keeping in zone one, zone two. Um, working that aerobic side of things, trying to raise our first lactate turning point up as much as we possibly can. The ability to use oxygen and fat as a fuel source more than carbohydrate. But then as we start getting to closer to the race, I tend to turn the switch on at around 6 to 8 weeks out. Is long runs then become marathon pace. Now, not the whole long run, but what I will do is, let's say it's a 17, 18 mile long run. That will be 16 miles, but it'll be half a mile easy, half a mile marathon pace, half a mile easy, half a mile marathon pace. And then as we get closer to race day, you might find yourself doing 22 miles as kind of your longest run, but with 3 blocks of 8K at marathon pace with
Right, I
with a
see.
2K recovery, that kind of thing.
And
So
obviously, the idea being that your marathon pace at that point is higher than it would have been 8 weeks ago because you've been raising that pace at which your body's comfortable through those interval sessions.
yeah, but also we are practicing for the race. There is no point in all of your long runs, and people get so fixated on long run. Like, what is the length of my longest long run? Is
Oh,
the
absolutely.
absolute most common question I get asked,
Yep.
and it's quite frankly irrelevant how long your longest run is,
Why? Why do you see it as irrelevant?
because what is the difference between doing 20 miles
Mhm.
and 24 miles? That 4 mile difference, what is the difference in adding those 4 miles in amongst all of the hundreds of miles that you've done over the course of the last 16 to 20 weeks? It is
Yep.
irrelevant.
Yep.
Now,
It
there
comes
might
down to all of that
be
base work that you've been doing instead of that
volume
last
is
four
king.
miles. Yeah.
Oh, well, actually, I've been saying this week, actually, volume is queen, consistency is king,
Ah, okay.
and volume is queen.
And
And
and when
then,
you say volume, we're talking volume of overall training, not
mhm,
necessarily volume of total miles done, because of course you see comments about junk miles versus quality miles. So I'm assuming you
yeah.
mean be consistent with your training as opposed to simply just run a long way every week.
Yeah, so consistency of training. So, turning, like I say to all you guys, turning those boxes on Training Peaks green.
Yep, does become an
Um,
addiction.
yeah, but the people that turn the boxes green, the ones that just show up, do the sessions, sometimes they don't all go that well. I had somebody yesterday who messaged me saying, my session didn't go very well. Okay, it's fine. If a session doesn't go very well, that's absolutely fine. I have sessions that don't go very well,
Mm,
fairly often, but that's okay. That's
mm,
not something to be worried about. Um, what you should worry about potentially, or certainly take note of, is if you have multiple days in a row where things aren't going well. It's like, okay, so are you feeling fatigued? Are you eating enough? Are you hydrating enough? Are you getting enough sleep? Is the volume too much for you? Is the intensity too high? We can start asking those questions and we can turn the dials up and down. But when I say volume is king,
mhm.
sorry, when I say volume is queen, is that it's all of that volume over time is what we're looking for. All of those miles that you put into the bank,
Yeah.
yeah, that's where on race day when you come to stand on the start line, whether it's a 5K or a marathon or a backyard ultra or whatever it might be, that is what is then, that's where you collect your interest.
And I suppose that makes sense then in terms of you would expect a larger volume for a longer race, hence why your start date for training for longer races tends to be further out from race day. So you
Mhm.
mentioned your 5K, you've got about an 8 week. You can get a good bang for buck, I should say, with an 8 week lead time. Much longer for a longer race because you just need that you need that bigger volume. You just need that more training under your belt.
Yeah, there's the need for more volume to a certain extent.
Ooh, okay.
But again, we come back to that specificity point because and a common misconception for something like, let's say a backyard ultra or a multi-day race or, a 100 miler ultra marathon. One of the common misconceptions with ultra marathon training is that you do more miles and your longer runs are longer and you do more back to backs.
Yep.
And that some of that stuff is definitely in the toolbox. But just because your race is longer, it does not mean that you need to do more miles in training.
So this was a question I'd written down, and when I was writing it down, it did seem bonkers as I was writing it. So I'm going to ask it anyway, but I realize how bonkers it sounds when actually written down. But so, for example, is someone who's doing a 50 miler, are they doing towards the end where or towards the part of their training where their volume is highest, are they really doing 15 times the weekly mileage of a 5K runner? Like,
No.
because if the further you're running your race, the more mileage you got to do, and we're sort of making the assumption that they're linear here, then there's no way a 50-mile runner is going to get 15 times the mileage in a week than a 5K runner. It sounds ludicrous as I write the question, but
Yeah.
you know, how does it sort of fit and feel? Because presumably there is a bit more mileage, or is
There,
it
there
more
is,
that the mileage is simply tuned differently?
it's a little bit of both. So, you would definitely see, let's compare two pro athletes. Let's compare Jacob Ingebrigtsen
Mm-hmm.
with Hayden Hawks, who
Mm-hmm.
it hasn't been announced who Trail Runner of the Year is yet, but Hayden Hawks is probably going to win it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, does he do more mileage than Jacob Ingebrigtsen? Yes, he does. Does he do 15 times more mileage than Jacob Ingebrigtsen? Absolutely not.
No.
Not even close. He probably does maybe um, let's say 50% more. So it is definitely still a marked amount.
Mm-hmm.
But what Jacob Ingebrigtsen is going to be doing is he's going to be doing a lot more high intensity. I mean, you hear about the Norwegian method, so daily doubles, double threshold sessions, the whole 4x4 minute thing. But I guarantee Hayden Hawks is going to be doing some of that sort of stuff as well at a certain point in his training.
Mm-hmm.
But the big difference between the two is that um, Jacob Ingebrigtsen's training, like specific training block for a race, is probably going to be about 4 weeks, where he's
Okay.
really practicing for that specific race.
Because he's already assumed to have a fairly steady baseline of
He'll have all
fitness.
the baseline.
Yeah,
He'll have
yeah.
done all of his speed work. Lots of that 400-meter reps and that kind of stuff. Hayden Hawks will have done that kind of thing, but he would have done it way out. So his specific training block is probably going to be more like 8 to 12 weeks,
Gotcha.
and what that's going to look like. Whereas Jacob Ingebrigtsen's going to be still doing lots of shorter reps. He's probably going to be doing like 1K at 5K pace times eight, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Hayden Hawks is most likely going to be doing massive days out in the mountain for, 5 or 6 hours with 6,000 feet of vert, for example. Or he might be doing, his race that let's say CCC. So CCC, the longest climb he probably would have done would have been about, let's say, 40 to 45 minutes
Mm-hmm.
from the bottom of the mountain to the top of the mountain. Um, the level he's performing at, he would have probably been getting his heart rate up into that lactate threshold too. So, getting very, very close to that lactate turning point where the body can't clear as much lactate
Yeah.
as it's producing. So during his training, he would have done blocks of, uphill running at lactate threshold for 45 minutes times two in a session.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is where that whole premise of specificity comes in. I would say specificity is probably the crown prince.
And I suppose that's where, and we're not going to get into the weeds of data collection and stuff today because that's not really where I was intending on going. But just to reflect on, I suppose that's where then coaching versus training plan, not to blow smoke up coaches' asses, but the ability to take the data from the athlete, look at that data, and then adjust the coaching to match where they are in terms of the data. So you know where the lactate threshold is roughly based on the data you're getting, and you know how to push that a little bit more in the right direction, specifically for the race that you can see is coming up, because you know the vert in the races that I'm going to be doing. You know a park runner is likely to be more flat, and an ultra is likely to be more hilly, and how big is that biggest hill. So okay, so that does help. Why do we bother collecting all this data? Because then you can adjust it for the specificity of the race.
Mhm.
So that makes a lot of sense.
And very importantly, alongside the subjectivity that comes
Of how the
from the
individual
athlete.
feels. Yeah, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I say it all the time. I could send you out on a let's say 10 by 1K intervals, and you hit the paces that I prescribe for you based on testing that we've done, and I do test all my
Hmm.
athletes usually through the means of a park run. If I've got lab data, I've got some people I coach that have got lab data, great, but um, there's no point in me. You might go out and do that 1K interval session, and I look at the data, and you've hit the paces, but without you then telling me that, oh, yeah, I hit the paces, Nick, but my God, like I could not have done that for a half marathon, for
Yeah,
example, or
yeah,
a marathon, or whatever it might be. Um, or sometimes, people come back to me and go, "Yeah, I found that session pretty comfortable." I'm like, okay, it wasn't supposed to be that comfortable. That probably means you've gotten a bit faster. Let's do a test again. So and that's where I usually suspect that people have gotten a little bit quicker if they've nailed a session to the point where they're like, yeah, I could have kept going.
yeah.
Not every session needs to be a tank emptier at all, but sometimes
But
when
when you've planned a session that should be a tank emptier, and you have an expectation of roughly how hard that should feel to an individual.
Yeah, or even if it's not a tank emptying session and somebody comes back and goes, "Yeah, I felt that was pretty comfortable." I'm like, right, okay, that says to me you've probably improved. So let's get you down to a park run again, or your next race that you've got coming up, and see where we're at. And yeah, invariably it comes back that somebody PBs or they've lowered their time from last time, that kind of thing. And then that's where I use that data to set training zones in training peaks,
Yep.
so that everybody I coach is working to the right, to training zones that are relevant to them. Because there's no point in me saying, right, Matt, your session today is 5 by 1 mile at 6 minute mile pace. If you can't run 6 minute mile pace,
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah. I know what I'd look like at the end of that training session.
and the other way as well. There's no point in me saying, well, okay, let's do 12 minute mile pace. If you're like, well, I do my easy runs slower than that. And that's why I'm sort of quite big on data
Yeah,
collection, because it ensures that the athlete is running to their personal training zones.
yeah,
And yeah, I do like RPE, raising a perceived exertion for the people listening. That means basically how hard does it feel. But unfortunately, I do find that most people, even very experienced runners and athletes, can't gauge their RPE that well.
I find it, coming at it from a psychology perspective, I find that it's incredibly variable depending on other external factors. So my RPE doing a session on my own is quite different to doing it with someone else,
Hmm.
and knowing that they're suffering as well. And so I find it if I'm going to rely on my RPE, so I use RPE quite a lot for my strength training, for example, but it
Hmm.
means that I have to make sure, and with strength training it's easier to do, that the conditions are exactly the same every time I train, so that my RPE is as near as possible relatable from one session to another. Whereas
Hmm.
if I was to do an interval session one week on my own and then separately a week after with someone else, the context would make the RPE, I think, non-comparable,
Mm.
and that I do struggle with.
And I think RPE does change daily
Mhm.
because what felt easy yesterday might not feel so easy today because maybe you slept crap. Maybe one of the kids kept you awake at night. Maybe you've got a lot of extra stress in your job, or maybe maybe you did a strength session yesterday and today you've got a little bit of DOMS. That kind of thing. So yeah,
Yeah,
I do like RP, but I do also like
data.
I do like using paces, and I do like using heart rate as well. So mixing the three is the way I work.
Well, in scientific research, we talk about the qualitative and the quantitative, and I
Hmm.
think there's a reason why the best research does take in both. The qualitative, the how does it feel to experience X, and the quantitative, what's the number associated with that, and how can we
Mm.
and measure that. So that makes a
Yeah,
lot of sense.
yeah, we're going off on a little bit of a
We are.
rabbit
I'm going to
hole
bring
there,
it. I'm going to
but
bring it back here with
yeah,
with strength training, because you said
yes,
your sort of personal motto is get strong, get fast, go, or get fast, get strong, go long.
hmm
And obviously long is dependent on the distance. I now understand the principles behind fast. One would assume there's a similar principle behind get strong, but how important is strength training for the different disciplines, from the very short and fast to the very long and a bit slower?
yeah. Um, I mean, strength training is always important, and I mean, I will freely admit I've been a bit crap with my own strength training in the last 6 weeks. I'm getting right back on it today. It's in my plan for today, um, and it does differ. For somebody like a 5K runner,
Hmm.
that strength intervention is going to be very different to somebody doing a 100 miler in the mountains. And there are going to be some movements that I would give that are going to be very, very much the same, particularly in particularly in that early period of training. Um, I always put people through a base phase of strength training, and that invariably will include heavy squats. It will invariably include heavy bench presses, heavy overhead presses, um, a row of some kind, and potentially a deadlift. Not a conventional deadlift. They're not that great for runners, but something like an RDL or stiff leg can be good. And you know exactly what the common theme is between those five movements
Yeah.
is they are compound movements. They
Yeah.
are full body. Even a bench press, bench press is not a chest exercise. Yes, that is probably the primary area, but a good bench press starts from the feet
Hmm.
and goes through the entire body. The core, the trunk, the shoulders, the back, even the muscles in the hands. Um, so those five movements will generally feature in anybody's training plan, no matter what distance you're doing. Where things get different is somebody like a 5K runner would definitely have more explosive powerful movements in, um, particularly as they start to work their way through the phases of the training plan and get closer to race day. You're thinking more, plyometric
Hmm.
type movements. So um, lots of hops and jumps
Yeah.
and even throws.
Oh,
Interestingly,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah, yeah, I
yeah.
can see why, but I wouldn't have thought of it initially. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're just really good for that dynamic core
Yeah.
side of things. Again, some of that stuff does feature with somebody perhaps doing a 100 miler, but much less.
Hmm.
The injury risk um, is too great when the volume is going to be higher for
Yep.
somebody doing a 100 miler. So I do tend to use that very sparingly. Um, but something I will always give to basically anybody doing whatever distance they're doing is strides. And strides, at the end of an easy run, that's 20 to 30 seconds of hard running. They are plyometric in their very nature.
Right. I was going to ask where you saw strides fitting in. Is it an interval type element or is it more a strength type element? But
It's neuromuscular, programming the patterns of running. They're really good for form. They're really good for cadence,
Mhm.
and they, like I say, they are plyometric and power in their very nature.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, that's kind of where I would give somebody doing an ultra marathon their plyometric stuff is there.
Yep.
Um, but then the sort of single leg movements that I'd be giving an ultra runner would be quite heavy step ups, for example.
Hmm.
Yeah, particularly if
Yep.
it's a mountainous one, because
Yep.
that's going to give you that power, um, that strength to get yourself up the hill. Whereas, very heavy step ups for a 5K runner, I probably would give them step ups of some kind, but it would be more dynamic, like um, lunge, like a reverse lunge into a step up, into a knee, high knee. It'd be more of a dynamic movement rather than a um, quite heavy step up.
And that makes sense in terms of, my experience of the detail that you go into when you are giving, when you give a strength session, yes, you give the exercise and the sets and the reps, but then you do go into giving descriptions on how the exercise should be performed. And I can see some of that coming in with, for example, my own step ups. Um, you're very clear on, yes, they need to be loaded, but the intent needs to be there in terms of a nice sort of firm step up, but a controlled step down, really making use of that eccentric
Mhm.
lowering phase in
Yeah,
a controlled fashion. So you're really benefiting that strength side rather than sort of just falling back to the ground to restart.
yeah,
So you can see that in terms of that level of detail that you put in. So that makes a lot of sense.
cool.
I mean,
Yeah,
one
and
of
then
the
there's
one of the things with strength, excuse me, one of the things with strength that I came across a lot in terms of the rehab side of things was just a nice analogy that, well, I say nice analogy. It can sound quite clumsy, I guess, but it depends. But if you were trying to make a car faster, let's say you took like a little Ford Fiesta and you're trying to make it faster, the analogy being this is our individual we're trying to make faster for their races. You could spend a lot of time putting spoilers on it, lowering it, making it aerodynamic, which is looking at how do we increase the efficiency of what we already have available in front of us. Or you could do the strength training equivalent, which is just put a whacking great bigger engine in it, then we can worry about trimming it later with spoilers and working on its aerodynamics. Functionally, having uh, more muscle, and that can be both in terms of volume of muscle, but also in terms of the neuromuscular connections that you've been alluding to whilst you've been talking. Both of those increasing the muscular capacity just means you're going to be faster. And there
Mhm.
is a little bit of evidence that says that it can support the reduction in injury risk. That sounds a bit of a mouthful. That's me trying to
Mhm.
get around saying that just being strong doesn't avoid injury because you can still get hit by a bus, but there's a certain level of being stronger that helps prevent injuries occurring in the first place because you simply have more capacity to deal with the loads. So, yeah, a bit of a clumsy way of getting around it, but
Yeah, but also, yeah, there's other things that I sort of think about with my athletes as well, and some of it's based on personal experience, some of it is, actually working with you as a soft tissue therapist. When I had my Achilles
yeah.
issue 5 years ago now, um, there are certain parts of runners that tend to break down, more often than perhaps in other sports. Achilles, knee, IT band, plantar fasciitis. Those are kind of the top four I think I probably hear of all of the time. So some of those strength movements are not just about preparing people for their races, but they're also a prehab um,
Yes.
application as well. So
Yeah.
I
And
give
deal
people
with the
things
loading
like
of the races.
I give people things like isometric calf holds,
Yes.
um, for example, because I know that Achilles tendons or any tendon likes load. That's how they get stronger and stay healthy. So doing something like isometric calf hold or a wall sit, great for the knee tendons in the knees. Um,
My legs scream during wall sits. Absolutely hate them. But
yeah, they
no, I
suck,
see the
but
benefit.
yeah, but you know, any I say I've said this before. Any coach that says they will keep you injury free with their programs is lying.
Yes.
Um, running is and particularly marathon, very long distances. Even the most, even the world's best get injured often, unfortunately. Um, with all of their teams of nutritionists and therapists and strength and conditioning coaches and running coaches and all of that around them, they still get injured. It is an unfortunate part of running because it is a very high impact sport. You are hitting the ground constantly, over and over and over for sometimes many hours, even days on end in the ultra world. You are going to get injured in some shape or form. It's about how you manage that and um, how you overcome it.
So as we taper towards the end of this chat, let's
Mm.
talk tapering. Because actually, tapering is a really interesting part I find of training because either some people are like working towards the taper because they can suddenly eat loads and they're running less and they're preparing for the race, or they start to panic about when a taper should start because what happens if they start tapering too early and what are the risks of tapering too late. But rather than that kind of detail, how does a taper differ, say, for someone doing the shorter distance races versus the longer ultra distance races? Like, is there a difference in taper, or actually is a couple of weeks of just lower volume relative to your training level enough?
So, evidence, and I cite Inigo Majika is his name, if I'm
It
not.
was a good attempt.
It was definitely an attempt. But yeah, he's been on several podcasts. He is kind of the I would say um, god of tapering. He's done so much study on it. There's loads out there, and he has basically. I'm not going to use the word proven because science is, I don't think, ever fully proven. Um, because
We
oh,
don't like to say we've proven something because it
no,
suggests we've tested something in every conceivable scenario, which is
yeah,
obviously gumph.
yes, exactly. So, but evidence informs, and I always prefer that terminology. Evidence informs us that roughly any distance that you are training for, um, around about a 2 week taper is the most optimal. However, that always comes back to, and there is always
Yeah, of course.
individuality, um, and I think certainly from coaching experience and personal experience, I've always found that a 2 week taper, 3 week is definitely a 3 week taper, can sometimes feel a bit too long
Hmm.
for people. You hear about like taper tantrums in people. They start getting annoyed because they're not running as much, or um, they start worrying about other things, or
Yeah.
all of a sudden, their foot has got an injury, or whatever it might be. So I, I, so with okay, let's just answer the specific question of the varying different distances. So, for something like a 5K, you are probably not going to need as much of a taper for a 5K
Hmm.
as you are going to for a 100 miler, because the whole premise of a taper is that we are trying to reduce the the chronic fatigue. So the amount of fatigue that we have built up over the period of our training plan, we are trying to reduce that so that when we get to race day, we are as fresh as possible for that race. And then the bonus of that taper, and it is a bonus, is that we get some additional adaptations, because adaptation happens during rest. It doesn't happen during training.
Yep.
Doing more training does not make you a better runner. focusing on recovery and rest is where you get those adaptations, and hopefully by the time we get to race day, we might have got some additional adaptations. So maybe we're a little bit faster, maybe we're a little bit stronger. But the main idea with a taper is that we are less fatigued for race day. Um, so yeah, a 5K, you know, a week, I think is
Okay.
probably enough.
Yep.
Um, Something like 100 miler, and I've got three people doing the Arc of Attrition in 3 weeks' time. Actually, it'll be 2 weeks' time come the weekend.
Mm.
Um, so something I'm doing with those guys is, and I have been doing with people doing things like 50 milers, 100 milers, ultra marathons, and even in the marathon context. Um, what I have found from experience is that too many of those big peak weeks in a row leaves people so fatigued at the end of the 2 weeks. It's very different to elites because running is their job. Sleeping in the middle of the day is part of that job. Us mere mortals, we have kids and jobs and stuff to do
Yep.
around our training. So we don't get as much of that opportunity to rest during the day. And so what I've actually started doing is having like a fire break before the final peak week. So you might have kind of like, let's say, 3 weeks in a row of volume going up, specificity, getting out on the hills, getting out on the coastal path, doing recce's, that kind of stuff. Having a cutback week, as I call them, to adapt. Not a massive cutback week, but a cutback week where I might drop the volume down by around about 40%. Then we do another final peak week. Then we do a 2 week taper, but it's a less aggressive taper. And what I've found in doing that over the years is that that whole taper tantrum thing, where
Mm.
people have gone from doing loads of miles, and then all of a sudden they've got this taper where mileage has gone down. They've got all this time on their hands. They're getting twitchy and annoyed, and because people do like you know people do report back saying, "Oh, like, my wife is getting proper annoyed with me, or my husband is getting annoyed with me because I'm
I'm
just
around too much.
grumpy." Or, well, I'm also grumpy and edgy, and I'm getting worried about the race and stuff. And I just find that yes, we need to ensure that we reduce that level of fatigue before the race,
Yeah.
but also we don't want to go into that race having had a really tetchy couple of weeks and spending time worrying about things. And I have found that little fire break in between two big weeks before we then taper
Mm.
has yielded really, really good results. Um, and there might be some people screaming down their headphones at the moment, going, "Oh, well, that's not what the science says." But a lot of the time, the science is actually born out of an idea from coaching.
Absolutely, and also, and this is one of the big challenges of all science that's applied to humans. At the end of the day, is that a lot of the evidence comes from large group studies where the quantitative data is important, but at the end of the day, the quantitative feeling of the individual is
Mm,
actually super important. It's exactly the same in the medical field. Is that,
yeah.
yeah, there might be evidence that a particular drug works for someone, but if they're the one that gets horrible side effects, you're not going to give them that drug. It's
Mm,
simple as that. And so if the side effects of a taper are negative for an individual, why wouldn't you want to try and mitigate those side effects as much as possible?
yeah.
That
Like
makes.
and these guys now that are doing, this, they've had their fire break last week. They had that reduced week,
Mhm.
this week now. And all three of those guys are doing the Arc of Attrition 100. Simon, Justin,
Lunatics.
and George. Um, all three of them are doing it, but that doesn't mean they've all got the same week this week. The structure, the premise rather of this week is very much about final volume, sharpening the tools um, before going into taper and then doing the race. But
Hmm.
they're all three individual people with three individual goals, and they've all got three individual plans. So um, but what they will find this week, having had that little fire break last week, is going into this sort of final peak week now, big volume, um, getting those final hills in, you know, I mean, George is on a treadmill this week doing 12 by 5 minute um, uphill treadmill. Um, because there's lots of elevation in the Arc of Attrition.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just a
Um,
bit.
yeah. Um, yeah, but what they'll go into this week, having had that fire break last week, is they'll get much more quality out of this week. You get so many ultra runners going into that final week. They're like, oh my God, I've got like, I'm knackered. I did,
Yeah.
you know, 14 hours last week. I've got 15 hours this week. That's been preloaded with loads of other mileage weeks, and they just go into this final week absolutely knackered. They don't get the quality out of the training, and you'll hear ultra runners, a bit more old school ultra runners, say, "Oh well, you need to practice running on tired legs." There is definitely a time and a place for that, but doing too much of that, we know that training in a suboptimal state is not a good idea. That's why I don't give people sleep deprivation training. It's a terrible idea. Okay, you're going to experience that during the race, but sending people out on sleep deprivation training is a terrible idea. You know, the studies have shown that even just one night of poor sleep, if you then have a night of poor sleep and train during said poor sleep, you massively increase the risk. Massively. I'm talking exponentially increase the risk of injury and illness just
Yeah.
on that one night. So I don't give it. And the best.
No, that makes complete sense. I
Yeah.
remember reading there's a blog buried somewhere on the internet. I think it was like 1994 of a Deca Ironman championship
Mm,
training, and it was written by a guy who he broke the British record, but he still came fourth or something overall in the race. Like it was one of those where he absolutely smashed it, but still didn't win. It was incredible, the performances. But yeah, looking at his training schedule, where he would literally just sit on his bike and cycle through the night, then get up the following morning and go to work.
yeah.
And you just reading it, you think, I don't know how you survived as long as getting to the race. Never mind, got through the race.
Yeah.
It's just mad.
Actually, just to sort of clarify for the listeners here is that what is actually a better specific, and this is where we're talking about the whole specificity thing here is, and the difference between training for a 5K and a 100 miler. Yes, you are going to be running through the night. So what we do know is that we can bank sleep. So what I do get people to do, um, particularly during that final week before the race,
Hmm.
get extra sleep. Get some extra sleep. If you normally sleep 8 hours a night, stay in bed for another hour. And if you do that over the course of the previous 5 days before you then get on the start line on, Friday or Saturday, you've banked yourself an extra 5 hours of sleep. And that is going to help with just performance anyway, but it's also going to help with that sleep deprivation bit because you have banked that sleep. And that's been, again, shown in studies, not proven, but shown in studies to help. Banking sleep does help.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Okay, I'll be working on that.
Hmm. If the
Awesome.
kids will let you.
If the kids will let me. Well, this is it. Then this goes back to, reality.
Yeah. And we could keep going down the rabbit hole here, some of the other things just as a highlight between the difference between training for something at like the 5K end and the 100 miler, ultra marathon end, backyard ultra. I mean that the difference between training for a 100 miler and a backyard ultra is very
Yeah.
different. you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Whereas like a 100 miler, I'd be getting somebody out to, you know, ideally get on the course, do some recce's, do some long runs on the recce's. For something like a backyard ultra, I get people to do like a 6 hour run, 3 weeks out from the race. But that 6 hours is they'll run 4.2 miles or 4.167 miles loop, get back
Yep.
to use their house as an aid station, get in the house, do, 10, 15, 20 minutes of, recovery, getting themselves ready. Maybe they use a bit of a massage gun because that's the kind of thing that if you're doing a backyard ultra, when you get back to the start line, invariably these races you're allowed to have a tent or
Yeah.
a little bit of a setup. And I mean, when I was coaching a guy called Joe last year. He did 28 he did 28 yards. Having never done above 20 miles ever in his life, he did 28 yards, which is 107 miles, I think. And one of the biggest things was about practicing the logistics. He
Yeah.
even had somebody there massaging him every time he got back. Just a quick massage.
Yeah.
But you could do something like have a massage gun. All of his food was laid out. He had changes of kit ready in particular bags. So every lap was thought about and considered. Um, so that's part of the specificity of the training is going out 6 hours worth of, do a loop, get back to the house, practice using the massage gun, practice training, getting into different kit because you need to practice that. It's a bit like triathletes. They practice
Transitions.
the transitions.
Yeah.
The faster you can do a transition, the more time you're going to shave off your triathlon time. And it's a little bit the same with a backyard ultra. Practice getting back from hour 4, for example, and getting changed into some dry kit because perhaps the weather's been shit. That stuff really, really helps come race day. Um, so yeah,
Yeah. No, it's that's good stuff. No,
nutrition,
brilliant.
nutrition for a 5K is
Well, so this
very,
was
very,
it. So
very,
I
very
did have
different.
another, yeah, I had another question on nutritional demands and what your advice would be for different athletes' nutritions for different distances. Um, and I
I
guess
mean,
also I was just
obviously,
thinking,
I was going to say,
sorry,
obviously, a very quick one would be, training for a 100 miler. You're going to need to practice eating on the run
yeah,
and fueling and volume of fuel and volume of hydration. You don't need to do that for a 5K. You don't need to do gut training at all.
no.
Yeah, you are going to need to fuel your training, and yes, there are going to be fueling requirements, but perhaps the carb intake is maybe not as high. Um, yeah, but
Yeah, and
certainly,
I was also thinking for a 5K as well, like you'd probably train a warm up as well. You'd try and find what warm up worked most optimally for you. Whereas most warm ups for ultras, in my experience at least, and I am rubbish at warm ups in general, is mostly like hopping around in front of the start line as a group, trying to not look cold before you get started, knowing that you're going to warm up in the first few miles because you're going to be going steady. Whereas, of course, in a 5K, you are hitting it hard the moment the gun goes. So you already need to be
yeah,
warm. So it's training those elements of the race prep as well.
yeah, something like a 5K, I'd definitely be getting people doing some strides before they race.
Hmm.
Yeah, lots of dynamic, bouncy stuff. Um, yeah, somebody doing a 100-mile race. Okay, you might want to do some dynamic stuff before you start racing, but I wouldn't get people doing strides. I wouldn't even get them, there's no value really in getting them doing a 10-minute warm-up jog
No,
because you could
there's
just
going to be
use
plenty
the
of that.
first, yeah, you're going to use the first 10 minutes of the race to do that anyway,
Yeah.
ideally.
Yeah. No, brilliant. Well, talking of, I'm going to have to go and start my warm up if I'm going to
Mm.
go and get anything done this morning.
Indeed. Yeah. No, thank you, Matt. Loved those questions. And yeah, just to wrap up, anybody who wants to get involved in anything maximum mileage coaching, we've got the Patreon account. So Patreon/maximum mileage, patreon.com/maximum mileage. And yeah, we've got loads more discounts with suppliers on there. Matt's actually can see my background here with all of
I
the
can. I'm very
Ugoku,
jealous.
all of the Ugoku projects hats that I've got hanging on my new office wall. And yeah, you can get discount with those guys, 20% discount, but you just need to join the Patreon. There is a free tier, and then there's a very cheaply paid tier as well. It's only 4.99. Yeah, those 4.99 a month helps us to create more podcasts and YouTube as well. Anybody who hasn't done so yet, I do have a YouTube channel now, and
Yes, up and running and looking good.
yeah, it was yeah, the last episode went down really well. I've got like 1,000 views on that. It's
Yeah,
only episode 3.
this is good. Let's keep it going.
Well, cool.
Awesome.
Thanks, Matt. Nice to see you.
You too. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Maximum Mileage Running podcast.
You can find more out about us at maximummileagecoaching.com. If you think you need help with your running and you think that either myself or Faye could be the coach for you, then drop us an inquiry. No obligation whatsoever, and we'll have a chat with you about your running. And there's plenty of resources on the website as well. And don't forget, you can join us on the Maximum Mileage Running Podcast Facebook group. Until next time.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.